Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Make Things Better podcast. Today I am joined by Helen Milner, CEO of the Good Things Foundation. So thanks so much for joining me today, Helen. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you,
Yeah, good to hear. Thank you for coming on. So I'm really keen to hear about your background first of all, because that's going to tie into what we're going to talk about today, which is mostly the digital divide, how attitudes have transformed over the last 30 years or so. So can we start off by finding out a little bit more about you and your background? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I started working in the internet in 1986, so that's a very long time ago. I can't quite work out how far long. It's interesting because my whole career I've worked in the internet, but I never really knew it was a special thing. I knew that other people didn't know about it and didn't get it, but it was just the thing I did and the thing I was passionate about. So in the beginning, that was about creating content. So this is pre-World Wide Web. So this is content in a walled garden, if you like. It was part of the Times group and it was for schools. And I was like in charge of content and aggregating content to put into that walled garden for schools. And then I moved to University of Sunderland, did a stint in Australia and looked after some Australian schools doing something similar, and also had a contract with the equivalent of BT in Japan at the time. Just to sort of show how kind of clueless I was, that I met someone at a conference who told me about, this was like when the World Wide Web was coming along, and they were doing a PhD at Stanford University, and they basically described a search engine to me. That's what they were doing for their PhD. Wow. I was going like, why do you want that? Why would you need that? Like, don't you know everything that's on the internet? So it was like I was having those conversations with those people who were thinking about things like search engines.
So this was really like early on, wasn't it? It was because, as you say, it was before like World Wide Web.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously the World Wide Web came in sort of late 80s, early 90s. It was really beginning to be kind of used more fully. At that time, I was at University of Sunderland. We established a unit called Learning Development Unit, which was pretty transformational about how do we change the way that students at university, how teaching and learning changes and how technology can support that. The important thing about my career, which is kind of relevant to the digital divide, it's always been about how people use it. It's not been about the technology.
Yeah.
So I'm not a techie, although obviously I can hold my own with techies, having done it for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I've always been really excited about what the technology can achieve, but it's always been the people at the heart of it. And I moved to Sheffield to set up the Learn Direct UFI, which was like an online college, if you like. And then that led me to online centres and to establishing Good Things Foundation.
Yeah. So what actually got you started and like interested? Like, where did the passion come from to get interested in technology and how people use it?
I think I was always excited about the fact that you can reach so many people, and that you can also collaborate. So even back in the 80s when I was creating content, I didn't want flat content. So I didn't just want it to be about what content can I aggregate and put onto my instance, if you like, of the internet. I actually brought together school children to collaborate with one another. I did something called World Tour, so I actually brought children together from around the world, and they went, and I did it over 8 weeks, a kind of 80 days kind of concept, and these kids could then learn from one another about how it's different living in, Doncaster to living in Paris to living in Alaska to living in the outback in Australia. And these kids were doing this collaboratively on a collaborative forum that we had created on our website, I guess you would call it.
Do you think that was one of the first times that children had interacted with each other via the internet, like from around the world then?
Oh, definitely. Like, there were some kids who the teachers told me, they were really upset. They were like, this kid cried in class because he didn't have a passport and he didn't think he was going to be able to go on this tour, so that they conceptually didn't realise that they weren't actually going anywhere. So that the fact that they could interact with children in other countries over the internet, and for it to be so live. I mean, imagine in those days, I mean, I actually lived in Australia at the end of the 80s, and it cost £5 a minute to make a phone call, right? That if you wanted to correspond with friends and family, you wrote a letter and you put it in the post, and it might arrive a week or two later. So this was instant communication across the whole globe. I mean, the funny thing is, because obviously I'm getting on now, obviously, but I sometimes meet people through work who was one of those kids. So we also did something with John Craven's News Round, which was like an election day. So we had kids all over the country online doing sort of elections within their schools and then sending their results in. So we had it was live on BBC telly, and we could look at what the results were of what the kids were voting compared to then what actually the parents then voted. And I've met adults through work who were kids who did World Tour and who also took part in John Craven's election day.
That's amazing. It must be so interesting to hear about their stories and to kind of reminisce those times from the past.
Yeah, I think so. And also, like you're saying, it's the first time they'd ever been on the internet, and it's the first time they've already felt that kind of power of interacting with other people as well in that synchronous way. Doing it real time. But we've also got to imagine these were times when they probably weren't even, definitely weren't searching for what the weather's going to be like today. Like the internet wasn't even an information tool at this point, and we were using it as a collaboration tool.
Did you ever envisage the internet getting as big as it is now? Could you even fathom that back then?
Yeah, definitely. So I've got a little anecdote. So when my son was born in 1995, because I can remember this, he was born September 1995, I was sitting in my living room with some friends that had come round to see the baby, and in the corner I had a computer, because although I was on maternity leave, of course I work on the internet, so I could just be online all the time and read emails and do things. And one of my friends said, why have you got a computer? What's that for? And I said, well, it's for the internet. I went, oh, that's just a fad. I went, no, in the future, you'll be ordering pizzas takeaway on the internet. And that I can remember the hush in the room, I've got baby brain, that I was a complete idiot, and that I was, somehow been, had this kind of fanciful idea that could not possibly be true. And it was only when I think back, and for me it was so obvious that was going to happen, but none of those other people in that room, it was obvious to them in the same way. So I guess by 1995 it was obvious that the internet was going to be a huge, huge thing. Yeah, but of course some people today, they're still excluded from that. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the Good Things Foundation and what that's all about then? Yeah, so Good Things Foundation, so we're a digital inclusion charity. We're based in Sheffield. We work all across the UK. We just turned 10 last December. Congratulations. Thank you. It was good. It's a real achievement, surviving 10 years. Yeah, no, that is quite impressive though, seriously. 4 years ago we set up a subsidiary in Australia, so we have a Good Things Foundation Australia as well. Did you choose Australia because you'd kind of been there before? Was there any connection there? Yeah, I mean, partly. I think it's because I had that understanding of the culture, I think, but also because we had done a lot of work with the government in the UK, that the Australian federal government, because that's who we got our first big contract with in Australia, the Australian federal government recognised that track record and recognised what we had achieved. So we, kind of national and international, we work with thousands of community organisations up and down the country, and we help them to reach digitally excluded people, and we support them with devices, with connectivity, and then with the support through that network. And we have an online learning platform called Learn My Way. So everything we do for people and for community organisations is free, and we fund that by working with big donors or corporates or government departments. Yeah, so I know this sounds like a bit of there's probably an obvious answer to this, but why is it important to you that people are included in digital? Well, I guess it's really interesting that you've been talking about the history, right? Because I've always seen that the internet is that pathway. So even if you think back in the 80s, taking kids from disadvantaged communities on a tour around the world that they possibly never could have done and probably still couldn't do without the internet. Like the opportunities and the benefits of using the internet are so huge. And I think sometimes for those of us who use the internet just, instinctively every single day, I don't think we really understand how powerful that is for us. That if you're not online, you can't apply for work really. Yeah, you can't apply for benefits. The pandemic, of course, massively put this into stark relief that we helped so many people during the pandemic. So we helped 22,000 people with a device, data and support. And some of them needed to apply for work, some of them needed to, look after their health, apply for medicines, do online consultations with medical professionals. But every single person that we helped, they said the main thing they needed was contact with other people. So actually, we definitely use it for information, we definitely use it for transactions. Services are much more efficient, much more convenient, but actually that fundamental contact. I once met a woman who told me she lived in Rotherham actually, and her mum lives in Grimsby, and they saw each other for the first time on Mother's Day over the internet. So quite often we talk about people who've got relatives in Australia or whatever, but sometimes if actually you don't have a lot of money and you don't actually own a car or you don't have transport, sometimes those connections could be as little as a couple of 100 miles in the same country. So I think we just massively take it for granted. And the other thing that happened during the pandemic is so many services, public services, commercial offers, even off the services that charities provide, went online because that was the easiest and sometimes the only way to deliver it. So if you weren't online, if you don't have a device, if you can't afford the internet and you don't have the skills to use it, then you're just cut off from that.
Yeah. So do you think, this is a bit of a more abstract question in a way, but do you think people are more or less connected now in the world because of the internet?
You mean with one another?
Yeah.
I think they're more connected. But I think behind your question maybe is the fact that we have a digital divide. And as that digital divide narrows, it deepens. So the people who are left behind are left further behind. So if everybody who's designing services, who's designing products, who's designing offers, fancy new tools, if they're not understanding that there are people who can't use those, who are cut off from them, it's like they're invisible, actually. And I think that's partly I'm proud about it, but before the pandemic, we worked around skills. We helped community organisations to help local digitally excluded people to get those basic digital skills they need to thrive in the world. But as soon as the pandemic struck, like in March 2020, we realised that when those physical places, those community centres, those libraries, those small local charities had to close their doors, then they no longer had access to the internet. And so the need to have a personal device, be it a phone or a tablet or a laptop, and then that connection to the internet became so critical. But that was invisible to me. I didn't know that there were so many millions of people who relied on those public internet spots or those community centres to actually just do the basics of being on the internet.
How do you go about discovering that? Because for me, I feel like I'm very oblivious to the fact that so many people are not part of the internet, because obviously on the internet you would never see anyone who's not on the internet. Like, of course you wouldn't, because that's impossible. So how do you go about finding out that a lot of people are only using the internet in libraries and so on?
So I think that's why I love the model that we have, is because we work with thousands of community organisations. So absolutely in the heart of their community. So they don't work at local authority level, they work at street level. They know those people on the street. They often will, so it might be a small local charities that working with local older people or local people with English as a second language, or people who have a disability, or just a general community centre that reflects the people in that community. So that they know that there are people who potentially are already using their services, who are digitally excluded. And so we always think that digital inclusion, so the activity of helping people to get those skills and to get that access, is best when it's embedded into the other work that you're doing. I think though you're right. I mean, I sometimes think of it a bit like a ghetto, right? Is that if you think about your family and friends, your colleagues, everybody's on the internet. But therefore, that's why I find that I'm really lucky that I can go and visit these communities and I can talk to people who don't have the internet. I, before the pandemic, was in a community centre, a really amazing charity in South London, and there were 13 people there who were using the service and using Learn My Way and, you know, having a really great time learning about the internet. And I asked them, how many of you have a phone, a mobile phone? 3 of them had a phone, and they got them out of their pocket and showed me. Only 1 of them was a smartphone. So this was 2019. 13 wow. people, 3 had a phone, only 1 had a smartphone. I said, do any of you have a laptop or a computer or a tablet or anything like that at home? And the woman who had the smartphone also had a laptop. So 12 people had nothing. 1 woman had a smartphone and she also had a laptop. And so that's the thing, is that I was still shocked, right? This is my job. This is like what I live and breathe every single day. And I was still shocked that what a small percentage of those 13 people had any kind of device. And affordability is a massive, massive issue.
Yeah, and do you find that usually those who are excluded and are not using digital already, do you think most of them want to, or do you come across people who actually have chosen not to?
Well, the data says that about 42% of the people who aren't using the internet say they're not interested and it's not for them. We did do some other research to get under the hood of that, and we found that there were, you know, trust is quite a big issue. They don't trust it. You know, there's quite a lot on the news about, you know, identity theft and financial risks, but that still means more than half want to do it, right? That, you know, and that's again the beauty of the Good Things model, where we work with local community organisations, because they can reach those people. And again, of the people who are digitally excluded, like 65% of them say that they would get help if they knew it was there, and 35% say they want local support. So actually, it feels like a perfect solution, doesn't it? Is that they want local support if they knew it was there. We have local support, and more than half of those people who are offline want to learn.
Yeah, so some of the main barriers then is obviously money. That's going to be one of the main ones, but then also the trust, and then the education. And I guess for a lot of people, if you don't have the money already and you're a little bit less trusting of it, then you've got 2 like really strong reasons not to, because you're not going to have the luxury of being able to even take the risk and, you know, have a chance on something.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we did during lockdown, though, but I think this is where I'm really passionate now about bringing the bundle of the device and the connectivity and the support all together. So during lockdown, we helped thousands of people who'd never used the internet before, because we could say, here is a tablet, it has a SIM card in it, that connects you to the internet. Here's a local person who will support you, you know, their name is X, and that person X actually brings it to your door, puts it on your doorstep, takes a step back, rings the bell, has a social distance conversation, then they say, I'll give you a call, or I'll what will happen is it will buzz, just press yes, and off you go. What our local community partners were doing, they were actually teaching people how to use the internet from the very first time they ever touched a device. They were on Zoom, and they were using Zoom to learn how to use the internet. So again, pre-pandemic, we would have said that was impossible to do, but actually they were getting really intensive, wonderful, informal local support, but with that device. So by bringing that package together, we're now working with Virgin Media O2, Vodafone and 3, and by them coming together, we've created a national data bank, and we've got 500,000 SIMs, so we can help 500,000 people to get free connectivity, mobile connectivity through that. So now we're calling on companies to give us their old kit, their old devices, their old technology, so we can bundle that together and get it out to digitally excluded people in communities. And our biggest problem is we know the demand is so huge, we've got to get those devices out of those corporate cupboards and drawers and get them refurbished and into the hands of the people who need them, because we know that demand is still so high, and it really has to be met. And it just feels like, you know, the UK is the 5th wealthiest country in the world, no matter what our politicians tell us, is that we should be able to support those people who can't afford it, with a good quality. I'm not talking about rubbish quality, good quality, pre-loved technology, the connectivity through our national data bank, and that support through our national digital inclusion network.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there about, you know, there is a lot of people in this country who probably are on, well, they just are on like way lower standards of living than others, because there is huge inequality here. And who would you say is sort of like negatively impacted by digital the most, or like who's the most excluded? Yeah. Is there certain like groups? Because I think there's a bit of a misconception that it's just the old people who are on tech. But
that's right. I mean, some older people are, but there's a massive correlation in the UK between household income and digital exclusion.
That's right.
So even if you're an older person, then if you, for example, have a decent household income, or even, you know, if you're a woman in your 80s and you've got a university degree, 99% will be on the internet.
Wow.
Right? So the correlation between education attainment and household income is actually much more important than age. Having said all of that, clearly we've got older people who have low incomes. Right, we've got 2 billion in pension credit that's not been claimed. Right, so that means there are pensioners all over the country who are eligible because their income is so low to get a pension credit benefit from the state, but don't claim it. So for them, buying broadband may well feel out of their reach, even if they wanted to do that. The older you are, obviously, you definitely didn't do it at school, and you might not even have used the internet in your career. So they may feel the barrier to entry is much higher for them. And also, you know, and I have some, I understand this one probably the most, is that, you know, if you're in your 70s or 80s and you've never used the internet and you've got a pretty nice life already, like you're happy, then, you know, it probably feels like, why would I bother? You know, and you can kind of think, well, if you're happy and you've got everything that you need, I mean, I would always say that I think there's benefits for you. One chap we had, a digital champion, he got online when he was 91, and it made such a massive difference to him. He became like a real evangelist, and he was out encouraging all of his friends and family, everyone at the golf course, he said, to actually get on the internet. So, you know, it's also never too late to learn, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great story that you've got someone who's 91 still, you know, getting on the internet. I guess, yeah, it is literally, you're never too late to get involved.
But when you bring the devices and data in though as well, it's clearly, a lot of it is about affordability. So that that it's important to understand that that is the underpinning reason for digital exclusion. That people who are disabled are also more likely than people who are not disabled to not use the internet. But again, also if you're disabled, you're more likely to not have a job. Right? So that these things are compounded, you know, the intersectionality of different disadvantages. But talking about benefits, if you're on a low income or from a disadvantaged community, you're much more likely to experience health inequalities. The government is spending billions on digital health services, but actually the people who are most likely to need them the most are more likely to be digitally excluded. So, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out, therefore investment in digital inclusion will actually help to realise the benefits in investment in digital services.
Yeah, and I imagine investment in digital inclusion is going to really contribute to just general equality.
Yeah,
throughout.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm with you on that. I mean, that we definitely have the economic arguments. So we know that investment in full digital inclusion for every £1 spent, you get a £14.80 return.
Not bad.
Not bad at all. So, the economic arguments are there, but I believe that it's now a case of equity. That if you want to be on the internet, if you, if you want to be on the internet to be the same as everybody else, that it's just a basic equity issue. Some people say that the internet is a human right or should be treated like a utility. So they're some of the things that we're actually exploring. We have a data poverty lab, and we've just actually launched a search for some fellowships. And one of those is actually, should the internet be treated like a utility or a human right or something else? That's really exciting. So we're looking for people to apply for those fellowships now.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because if we look back to how this conversation started, you were talking about almost being dismissed by saying that you're going to be ordering a pizza through the internet in the future, and now it's like almost becoming a human right, which is incredible. So over the last 30 or even like coming up to like 40 years soon, how have attitudes towards the internet changed? Obviously we've touched on this a little bit, but what has been like some of the main things that you've seen in your time?
Well, even if I just think career-wise, 20 years ago, when the concept of having a place in every community where people can go to use the internet, this is a politician desire, is that only a third of people use the internet. So this is 20 years ago. Right. So
not even that long ago.
Not even that long ago, no.
Yeah.
So only a third of people use the internet. Also at that time, it was also really expensive. Like, you couldn't really buy a computer for less than £1,000, right? So it was also, the market wasn't really there. So the internet is almost invisible now, I think, to many people who use it. Use it on the go, use it at home on your smart TV, use it on your Alexa or your Google Assistant. That obviously, at work and sending out your podcasts, the internet is everywhere. We almost don't talk about it because it feels so ubiquitous. That actually, to understand that it's ubiquitous in availability, and I'm sure people in rural areas will tell us that it's not ubiquitous, that they still don't have choice of supplier, and in some places still not very good. But actually it feels ubiquitous. Therefore, we are excluding people from it. Because actually, if we're designing our society with the assumption that everybody is able to use the internet in many different ways, in mobile, with smart devices, then actually we're just leaving people further and further behind if we don't understand that either we have a duty as a society to pay for people to be on the internet if they can't afford it, or we're just blind to the fact that it's such a big problem.
Yeah, I suppose as people are starting to take it for granted, and it's just becoming obviously a subconscious habit to use the internet almost all the time now for a lot of people, and because it is becoming invisible, I guess it then becomes a lot easier to forget about the ways in which we're excluding people. And I'm sure there's so many ways that people are creating things in the world and setting things up and just being completely oblivious to the fact that some people just won't ever see this stuff and won't ever take part in it. Even with this podcast, there's going to be people out there who will never have the opportunity to even watch this, whether they want to or not. They probably won't, but even if they wanted to, they're not going to have that opportunity. But that's something that would never really even cross my consciousness really until this conversation. So it's really good to kind of get that message out there.
The good news though is that people who are designing, your doctor's surgery or your, I was interviewed by Yours magazine recently, that's going to go on in a magazine that will go into the hands of older women mostly, is that there are people who do see and understand that there are visually excluded people.
Everyone has a Good Things Foundation clearly as well.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, everyone has a Good Things Foundation. And I think that as long as we keep them in mind. I mean, obviously, as we've been talking, that I'm very excited about the potential of the internet, with the potential to bring huge benefits and huge opportunities to people. I just don't want to leave anybody behind, really, and that's what my mission is.
Yeah, it's great that you've got that mission, because it's such an important one, and as we've said, it really correlates to just equality in general, which is such a huge thing. So my final question for you, and it's been great chatting, is what can people do to make things better? And you can interpret this however you like.
Well, number one, know that people exist who don't use the internet. There's 10 million people who don't have the skills to use the internet in any kind of functional way. There's at least 2 million people who can't afford to be online, can't afford an internet connection.
That's in the UK.
That's in the UK, yeah. So just know that they're there. If anyone's designing services, keep them in mind. But, my real rallying cry would say, search out Good Things Foundation and help us to get the people who want to be online, because that's the best way that we'll close the digital divide and make sure that everybody who wants to be and everybody who's able can actually have that opportunity and enjoy those benefits like we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Really
Pleasure.
do appreciate it. Thank you to everyone watching or listening, and I do hope you have an amazing rest of your day.